just off the bat, to let you guys know, this is going to be a very one-take, directly from the heart kind of episode. There's not going to be anything popping up on screen, so if you want to podcast this or throw this in the background, feel more than welcome to do that. For those of you guys who are watching video, if you're curious about this big shiner on the side of my face with this admittedly adorable frog band-aid, I slipped and tumbled on my front lawn and actually scraped the back of my eyebrow on the stone front porch steps of my house. So that's not, wasn't pleasant, but doing all right, all things considered. For those of you guys watching this on video, if I look like I'm reading a script, it's because I am. We'll try to keep the flubs to a minimum as best we can, but otherwise, here we go. In case you don't know who I am, my name is Ken Johnson. This is Dead Men Inc. I'm a writer and YouTuber who, while I hope to do a variety of things, got my small but loyal following on YouTube throughout Dropout fan edits and a series of Dropout video essays, like the Lou Wilson effect, the Jacob Wysocki effect, the soon-to-be re-uploaded Erika Ishii effect, and Game Changer versus Taskmaster. About a week ago, it was announced by several outlets that Dropout would be featured in the story of an ABC show, The Rookie. This led to many discussions across the internet as fans had very mixed feelings, to put it lightly, about Dropout directly associating with them and collaborating with this kind of show. There are a lot of competing factors going on here as far as the impact of doing this kind of crossover, both positive and negative. While it's impossible to read the minds of Sam Reich and the people at Dropout, Dropout is big enough and independent enough to make their own decisions. It is my assumption that at least the thought process behind this kind of endeavor is that Sam Reich and the other people involved thought that the good aspects of what an opportunity like this could bring to Dropout, to the performers, to everyone involved, would quote-unquote outweigh the negatives involved. I'm not saying I agree with that. I am in no way saying by explaining this that I personally agree with that perspective. But it is my best guess as to why this strange idea made it all the way through production. What is my personal opinion on the subject? I admittedly find it to be a very strange move for them to make, and one that I am not happy with. I do, however, think that Dropout has earned enough goodwill to deserve the benefit of the doubt. Not as far as explaining away the situation, but in the sense that I am confident enough in them as a whole to put a pin in the situation for the most part, to continue to watch how this situation develops, and sadly feel that I have to be a bit more cautious about situations like this if they were to pop up in future. It is a blight on an otherwise pretty stellar reputation, and I hope that this is just a bad fluke and that we don't have another situation like this again. At least that's the best I can hope for. I'll be the first person to admit that I believe that sometimes terms like parasocial get pulled out too often. Yet at the same point, the basics of that principle do apply to the situation, and I think it's something important to keep in mind when controversies like this happen. I love Dropout, and I love the fact that in some small ways, Dropout has interacted directly with me, and that makes me feel great. But it's also important to remember that Dropout is not your friend, Sam Reich is not your friend. And even if I don't agree with the fact that Dropout decided to team up with a show that, in their own way, teams up with the Los Angeles Police Department, it is their right to make that decision. And it is the right of everyone watching Dropout to decide what they feel about that decision, and it's my right to criticize it. And also to criticize the episode that they made and look at whether or not all of this was worth it. But I will say before I move on to the actual episode, I'm not the biggest expert when it comes to Copoganda. There are plenty of resources that you can find online of YouTubers far more talented than me that do a better job of covering both Copoganda as a whole and the show The Rookie, and I'm going to have those resources located in the description down below, and I highly suggest you check those out. So while not everyone is going to agree with my approach here, I thought that it was important to also take the time to talk about the episode itself. Because like it or not, this has now become an important part of Dropout history. And hopefully this video will be an interesting resource for people who feel conflicted. Because I know there's going to be some people out there who want to watch this episode, don't ethically feel great about it, and still kind of want to know what the episode is about and what's going on. And so, if you want that information and want to not give ABC your money, maybe this video will be a good alternative for you. So, with all that controversy going on, that leaves us with one question. Is The Rookie, Fun and Games, any good? Well, it certainly is an hour of television. I went into this with an open mind, as open of a mind as I could, at least. And personally, I prefer to stay on the positive side of things. I've never wanted to be that guy on YouTube who rages at his computer screen and complains about how something is the worst of anything that they've ever seen. That said, I cannot bury the lead here. The Rookie episode, Fun and Games, may be the worst piece of content that Dropout has ever been associated with. To start, a few necessary disclaimers. I do not watch The Rookie, and have little context as to these characters or their storylines. That being said, based on the general humor and tone of the show, I don't think that The Rookie seems to be that good of a show. But that's going off of an extremely small sample size, for whatever that's worth. In the episode, Nathan Fillion, alongside his partner, are dispatched to the Dropout set, in which a gunfight has taken place and all of Dropout's equipment has been stolen. And so Nathan Fillion and his partner now have to listen to Sam Reich and the rest of the Dropout cast members as they fumble along with some absolutely horrible dialogue, trying to joke their way through improv comedy with material that is far less funny than what they would have ended up with if they let any of these characters just improv for themselves. Considering the amount of controversy involved in this episode, it becomes even more infuriating when you realize that so little on-screen time was given to Dropout. The show is split into several, arguably too many, competing storylines that barely interact. And even more so, the Game Changer plot feels so incredibly tacked on that you could basically put this plot on any episode of The Rookie. And for a full 1 hour show, Dropout is featured only between 5 and maybe 10 minutes of the entire runtime, with the Dropout cast only getting 2 scenes and Sam Reich barely getting 3. And even then, watching the episode, I don't know who this would be more confusing for. People who have seen Dropout or people who haven't. For those who have not heard of Dropout, the plotline does absolutely nothing to show you anything about what Dropout is or how funny it can be. In fact, the characters of the show are intentionally written to act like the most grating and self-absorbed people you've ever seen in any improv group. No effort has been put into giving any kind of individual personality to any of the characters involved, who even in this little bit of screen time, clearly you would have been able to give them something, anything to diversify them. But they're all just treated as just one giant blob of quote-unquote comedy. And because of that, these representations of Dropout are left to just deliver just completely unfunny material that, once again, would be way funnier if they just let them improv it in the first place. And worse yet, where this falls apart is because of these characterizations, these comedian characters in the show who are supposed to be giving material that is not funny in universe, it's also material that's just not funny for the audience. Their entire point in this episode is to comedically obstruct the investigation at every point possible by just intervening with their different pitches for jokes and gags and things like that. And it doesn't help that none of them are funny. And to be clear, not only are all the performers here talented improvisers, but all have been featured in several big scripted projects as well. This is not a question of them being talented or not talented. This is just them being given absolutely nothing to work with. Especially when the format in which these scenes are shot are almost tailor-made for them to just let them make as much improv as they want and then cut it down into the size they needed for the show. It almost would be more trouble and more effort for them to let them be scripted in these scenes. And yet the result is all the worse because of it. And if we're looking at this from the perspective of it being an advertisement for Dropout, it fails on almost every single level. Nothing about the way that this show presents Dropout gives any impression that they're actually a real company, and very well could have just been some weird fake thing they just made up for the show for a couple of gags. And at the same point, if you do think that they're real, they don't give the impression of Dropout as this international reaching, multi-million-dollar giant juggernaut of independent entertainment, and instead makes it look like something to the equivalent of Doug Walker's absolutely failed project Pop Quiz Hotshot. And let me tell you, if we're at the point where I'm comparing Dropout to the fucking Nostalgia Critic, you know we're in some bad shit. So to recap, they do nothing to tell you that Dropout is a real thing. They don't show you at all what Dropout is, or all really what they do. And on top of that, they don't let Dropout actually be funny. So even if you did know that Dropout was real, and you did know what they did, it's not funny, so why would you want to check them out? And look, that's just the non-fan perspective. But somehow the fan perspective is even worse. So to get kind of the actually stuff out of the way, not the show, but the problems with this setup, right off the bat, it's really irksome that based on the way that they're kind of pitching their comedy routines, it's something much, much closer to something you'd see on Make Some Noise, and yet Game Changer is the show that they're actually portraying on the episode. But because of the twist at the end of the episode, when it actually turns out that Sam Reich tried to get fake robbers to rob the studio, but instead got real robbers to do it, so it clearly is Game Changer. But imagine, for a second, going back to the non-fan perspective, you're like, okay, so is this an improv show? Is this a game show? Is this a prank show? What the hell is this? So none of that works. And on top of that, there's absolutely no mention whatsoever of any other kind of project that Dropout is involved in. And even furthermore, as much as Sam Reich has claimed that the people at The Rookie reached out to them because they're just such big Dropout fans, you'd think there would be any kind of clever Easter egg or inside joke or anything like that woven into the script of the episode. There's nothing. In fact, what little dialogue there is that seems even remotely connected to actually what Dropout is just kind of vague platitudes that I can't tell if they're trying to actually show how progressive Dropout is, or if it's a joke about, performative wokeness, or what. There's one mention in the episode that kind of points to the fact that they pay their people well in a way that doesn't even feel like a joke. It feels like a weird, out-of-place call-out that just really falls so flat, much like the rest of this episode. And I could go on. There's plenty of nitpicks I could land about all sorts of things in this episode, even in the short, teeny tiny amount of this episode that it's involved in. But ultimately for me, for such an optimistic person who loves Dropout, the worst thing I can say about this episode is that there's nothing positive I can say about this episode. And with all of that, the question comes back again. Why did they make this? Who is this for? And well, yeah, I'm sure Sam had his reasons. And while I am going to continue to be frustrated and confused at this strange compromise of their morals, I would have at least loved to feel like it was for something. I would be happy to see this episode either as a showcase of what Dropout can do and an exhibition of its talent, or as just a big point of exposure to show people who don't know about Dropout how amazing it can be. And sadly, in my opinion, despite all of the controversy, despite all of the goodwill that was sacrificed to make this episode, The Rookie, Fun and Games, fails at every possible level. I don't know. I'm not mad, Dropout. I'm disappointed.